Great reporting, Anthony, as always. And if you have any information about that missing 4-year-old boy, please contact authorities immediately. And again, you can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. But let's focus right now on our main live trial of the morning. We're waiting for it, the Kristopher Love case. And to help me talk about where I am and where we are in this case, joining me via Skype is juvenile judge and trial attorney Ashley Willcott. Great to see you again. How are you?
Good morning, Jesse. Good to see you, too.
So let's talk a little bit about where we are in this case. We saw day one of the prosecution putting forward their penalty phase part of the case. How do you think they're doing so far?
Well, I do think they're doing well. You know, the prosecution gets to present victim impact statements, witnesses who are, it's the emotion of the case, quite frankly, right? And they're showing the reason why they believe that he should receive the death penalty from the jury. And I think this is an easy case, quote unquote. I don't mean that in a bad way, but it just is a case where there is a real outpouring for this victim and really horrific crime. So I think they have an easier job than they might sometimes have in this phase.
We know the prosecution is going to call a few more witnesses, but we were a little surprised to learn that the defense is planning on calling 15 witnesses. It seems like a lot.
I said the same thing when I heard 15. It is a lot. That's unusual. We don't typically see that. It's going to be interesting to see what they present, right? They're going to try to present mitigating factors and things that mean he should not obviously receive the death penalty. I don't know what all those witnesses are going to say, but I'm fascinated to hear.
Yeah, that is definitely something we're going to want to watch for. And I got to ask you, how much does the jury think about what happened, the evidence that they were presented in the trial phase? We're looking at his interrogation tape, which we know didn't go over so well. How much do they consider that when they ultimately consider the death penalty part of the case?
Well, you know, theoretically, they shouldn't take all of that into account. They have the conviction, they know what happened, and now they need to focus on the evidence presented by the prosecution and defense. But you can't erase their memories. So somewhere in their mind, they'll still be thinking about it.
Can't erase their memories. And unfortunately, a lot of the family members have these memories of this victim, and it's very hard for them to move forward. And I want to play some of the testimony that we saw yesterday. So this is Ashley Turner. She is the sister of Kendra Hatcher, and we're going to see a lot of this kind of testimony. We saw a little bit in the trial phase, and now we're seeing it more in the penalty phase about, you know, how much this murder, how much the loss of this person has affected different people. I want to play Ashley Turner. I'm just waiting to see if we can confirm if we have that clip. Maybe we can play it in a second. So let's before we go to there, let me go back to Ashley. You know, the family members coming forward, what does that do for a jury?
Oh, it's huge for a jury because they actually then get to hear, you know, they've seen the pictures of the victim and they've heard what happened to the victim, and they know the victim is a dentist, for instance, but they don't know all the details about her personality, what she was like, what she was involved in, and all of those things will be presented to paint the picture of this complete person whose life has been taken away. It's pretty significant. Yeah,
there's a real human aspect to this story. And unfortunately, we don't have Ashley Turner, the victim's sister, clip ready. So instead, let's go to Tammy Patano, and she is the friend of Kendra Hatcher, the victim. Let's play some of that testimony from yesterday in case you missed it. You know, Ashley, as we watch that, I can't help but think, and we see a lot of this testimony in penalty phases, sometimes in the trial phase, people lose loved ones, but to lose a loved one in this fashion, when she was living her life, just going about her day, had no idea that she was being followed for days and weeks ahead. And then that day she's shot by somebody she never met before. How tragic can this story get?
Right. It should have never happened. And so you're right. Often criminals beget criminals. And so some of the individuals who we see death penalty cases about as victims have been involved in some type of criminal activity. Now, I'm not saying they deserve to have been murdered, but it can happen because of who they associate with. This is not that case. This is, like you said, someone going about their own business, dating, having fun, working hard, ambitious, good family, and it happened. It does make it, to me, that's an aggravated circumstance. It makes it even worse, right?
I mean, that's the key there, isn't it? Is that why, I mean, let's face it, if the jury comes back with a recommendation for the death penalty, we haven't seen this in Texas since 2013. It's a long time. Does this case qualify for that?
I think that it does, and I think part of it is, again, aggravated circumstances that you already described: stalking her, planning, the premeditation, the amount of care, so to speak, that these criminals took in this person who's now been convicted in planning her murder. It just all adds up. Again, is the defense going to present mitigating factors? I don't know. We'll see through their witnesses.
Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable, if you ask me. But this is not the only person that testified on behalf of the victim. We do have the testimony now of Ashley Turner. This is the sister of Kendra Hatcher. And again, as you can expect, very emotional testimony. Nobody who knew her would have hurt her, but Mr. Love didn't know her. You know, Ashley, what do you expect as the state continues their case today in day 2 of the penalty phase?
I think they're going to continue to present witnesses like this, Jesse, who are going to continue to show the emotional, psychological damage to the family and to the community that happened as a result of this murder. And those are aggravating circumstances, again, to show that he should be given the death penalty by the jury. And
we're going to talk after our next break, or after our break right now, we're going to talk more about what was presented yesterday about his criminal record and his tattoos. Stay tuned. Okay, so let's break down what happened yesterday, because there was this discussion about Mr. Love's criminal past. Also, we're going to talk about that his tattoos were entered into evidence as well. You know, Ashley, as you look at this, defendant's prior criminal history, everything that they did, how does that really affect the determination for a jury? Because either which way, if he's such a danger to society, he's still going to be locked up for the rest of his life. So how effective is this?
So with the death penalty phase, as you well know, Jesse, you specifically as a jury have to look at any aggravating circumstances. And by definition, an aggravating circumstance can be the criminal history of a defendant. And so it's one piece of the puzzle that the jury needs to hear to see whether or not they think that amounts to aggravating circumstances. Because if an individual has been accused of, or convicted, not accused, if they've been convicted of crimes in the past, it speaks as to whether or not this was aggravated circumstances and they should actually receive the death penalty.
Well, clearly he's had run-ins with the law, and what I talked about earlier in the program was the fact that there's actually an active warrant for his arrest because he failed to appear for a court date. I want to talk about that right now with Brad Hill. I mean, this is a testimony of Brad Hill, a special agent from the Memphis Drug Task Force, who talked about an arrest of Mr. Love and how he failed to appear for his court appearance. Let's listen to that right now.
Possession of a firearm, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Agent Hill, do you recall the status of that felon in possession of a firearm case as of today?
Mr. Love's got an active warrant for his arrest through Dyer County Sheriff's Department failure to appear.
Okay, that case is still pending, and he currently has an active warrant because he did not appear.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Agent Hill. That's all I have.
Thank you.
In fact, Agent Hill,
broke the law, kept breaking the law, and finally broke the law with being found guilty of capital murder. Ashley, I can't help but think, when we think about why Brenda Delgado wanted to enlist the help of Love, she probably thought, hey, he's a career criminal. He knows what he's doing.
Absolutely. And then I just have to point out, think about this, Jesse, in turn of events. What if he didn't have an active warrant? What if instead he'd actually been arrested on that warrant? He could have been in jail. He might have been incapacitated and not able to commit this particular crime. So if you follow that chain of thought, it's another reason why that's an aggravated circumstance.
That is what we see a lot in these cases, when there are opportunities to lock the defendant up beforehand and maybe the victim would still be alive. We'll talk more about it right after this. Okay, I want to talk more about this this line of evidence being brought in. Back here with Judge Ashley Willcott. Judge, let me ask you a question here. These tattoos, is it fair to bring in this evidence? I mean, we're assuming that that's why he got them. One-man army, you know, showing life and death with money signs, showing that, oh, he would kill for money. Is that fair?
Well, again, the prosecution can introduce any evidence that they believe shows aggravating circumstances. And I think there's a very valid argument that A, he's been convicted of other crimes, a career criminal. B, this directly points to, Jesse, what you just pointed out, which is he's a career criminal and he'll do anything for money and he'll shoot people and he has a gun and the bullet holes and the smoke and the money signs. I think it is fair to bring this evidence out in the death penalty phase.
Now, cast aside the fact that he was just convicted of murder. In general, though, people get tattoos. Doesn't necessarily mean who they are or what they stand for. They get a tattoo. Maybe he liked the way they looked. Maybe he's trying to bolster himself up, make himself look one way, make himself look tougher. Is that, again, I mean, couldn't this be seen as prejudicial?
Absolutely. And so the prosecution's job to make certain it's not seen as prejudicial is to tie the tattoos with all of the other penalty phase evidence that they're presenting to say it's not just that he has tattoos and wanted to look this way. It's that he's been convicted of crimes in which he has acted this way and he has a propensity to act this way. And they have to tie it all together. Otherwise, you're absolutely right. It is prejudicial.
Yeah, no. And listen, the jury here, they have a big decision in their hands. They already found him guilty, but now they hold a man's life in their hands, and it's a much different decision. We're waiting for the live feed in the courtroom, but we have a lot more to talk about right after this break. It's really tough. Every time you watch that video, it's just so unbelievably real. You know, I'm back here with Judge Ashley Willcott to talk about it, and I can't help but think, Ashley, that when you look at that, you can't help but appreciate the close-range aspect of this shooting. I mean, we know that a shell casing was found in her car, and the idea that what we're going to learn a little bit later from the medical examiner is that this looked like an execution-style killing. That is what makes this a different kind of murder. This is what makes it a capital murder, correct?
That's correct. And here's what bothers me most about that video you just saw. Jesse, you can see the back door is cracked and open. It's as if she were going to her door like any of us might, to put in a bag, to put in a purse, to close the door, to get in the driver's seat. And then she didn't even know what was happening. She didn't even have an opportunity to defend herself. Comes up, shoots her from behind. She never saw it coming. It's really the worst case scenario, and it absolutely does make it a capital murder case. And
she was shot by somebody she had no idea who he was and didn't know that he, and along with Crystal Cortez and Brenda Delgado, well, allegedly Brenda Delgado, were tracking her. And that's what makes this really such a sad case. I want to play some of the testimony, though, of the assistant medical examiner, Dr. Varsha Padaturi, and she will explain a little bit more about the execution-style shooting and where the bullet was and the trajectory of the bullet. Take a look. Okay, so based upon the trajectory of the bullet and the wound, it seems like it was an execution-style shooting. And Ashley, the defense here went with, well, our client, this was just a robbery. He just robbed her. He didn't shoot her. This wasn't, you know, that's their defense. That's what they went with. But when you look at the evidence, it just doesn't back up with their claim. Do you think that that was their best argument, saying, well, he robbed her, but he didn't shoot her?
I think that was the only argument they had, because otherwise they would have come up with something else. And I think that's his story, and he's sticking to it, right? That's what he came up with. But you're right. It came in the back of the head, pointed down. It was an execution.
Yeah, and that's what makes this a different kind of case. But we can't talk about Kristopher Love without talking about Crystal Cortez. She was the getaway driver, and she took a plea deal for 35 years in prison in connection with her involvement in this crime in order to testify, and in exchange for testifying against Mr. Love and probably testifying against Ms. Delgado in her trial. So let's play some of her testimony right now, because it became central to the prosecution's case. Just the nonchalant aspect of planning this murder. Just that's what is really, really disturbing. And, you know, Ashley, as we watch her, the big issue for the defense was, why should we believe her? She's lied to the police in the past. She took a sweetheart deal. I guess you could say that, 35 years in prison for that. Do you think she had credibility issues?
You know, I don't, because number one, the level of detail of her testimony and all the specifics that she consistently provided in her testimony. But two, Jesse, yes, she took a deal to not get the death penalty, but 35 years is a long time. What incentive at this point does she have to lie? 35 years, she's in jail the rest of her life, basically.
Her demeanor, though, the way she's explaining planning this, as if it's me going to take a Starbucks order and going out there. I mean, really, what she's saying here, do you think she was coached before she went on the stand by the state about how to say certain things, or maybe by her attorney? I mean, she's so methodical, no emotion, no remorse.
It's cold and calculated, and I think that probably is her personality, or else she wouldn't have engaged in this criminal behavior in the first place. I think it speaks volumes as to the defendant, who probably also is cold and calculated. No big deal. We're planning this crime. We're getting paid. We're getting money. That's what criminals do, Jesse.
Yeah, it's so chilling. And one of the things that maybe we'll talk about later is that Jose Ortiz, whose car was used, and was an innocent bystander in this case, whose car was used in connection with this crime. It was actually taken by Brenda Delgado and driven by Crystal Cortez. He actually kind of had a thing for Crystal Cortez. He kind of liked her. I'm imagining that may not be the case right now.
You'd hope not. But again, we talk about poor choices. And do you know that you're getting involved with somebody that's capable of these things? Did the victim have any idea that she was getting involved with somebody who'd been involved with somebody who would do this type of crime? Probably not. You'd hope not, but it's really awful. Yeah, we learned that she didn't know anything about Brenda Delgado, but Brenda Delgado sure knew a lot about Kendra Hatcher. Pretty sad. Stand by. I want to let all of our viewers know something about a very special promotion that we have going on, so let's talk about it right now. If you go to NBC Universal's Watchback app and you go to Law and Crime, we're on there, we have a special Larry Nassar documentary, and if you watch that, you can enter to win signed copies of Dan Abrams' book. And this is we talked about it a few months ago. It's a great book. It's Lincoln's Last Trial, the murder case that propelled him to the presidency. You can get signed copies. So again, go to the NBC's Watchback app, go to Law and Crime, and watch our Larry Nassar documentary, and you can enter to win a chance to win those books. So you're not going to want to miss that. Okay, let's talk a little bit more after our break about Mr. Love, because there is a lot to discuss. Stay tuned. Great reporting as always, Anthony. You can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories. And if anybody has any information about that 4-year-old, that missing 4-year-old, please contact authorities immediately. Let's switch gears, though, here on the network, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Kristopher Love, because we are waiting to go live in that courtroom. I'm looking at the courtroom feed. Nothing has started quite yet, but that's okay, because there's so much to discuss. And joining me right now is my very special guest, who's been with us so far since the early part of the morning, juvenile judge and trial attorney Ashley Willcott. Ashley, we talked a little bit more about this at the top of the hour, but I want to elaborate on it further. We believe the defense is going to call 15 witnesses in the death penalty phase. Who do you think these witnesses will be? Well, so their goal is to show any mitigating circumstances, right? And I think that that's going to go to anyone who knew him, knows him. For instance, one thing that we see in a lot of these cases is bringing up the defendant's background and what they've gone through and if they've had a hard life. And I don't know if that's the case with Love or not, but I'm guessing with 15 witnesses, that might be some of the evidence. That's a lot of witnesses.
But does that even work, really? Because some people can make the argument, hey, I've had a tough upbringing. I've had a tougher upbringing than Mr. Love, and I didn't go out and become a criminal.
Well, here's the hard thing to predict about a jury. Keep in mind that in death penalty cases, they have the empathy, the emotions, their morals, and they have to balance that with a rational decision based on all of the aggravating and mitigating circumstances that have been presented. And so that's a really hard mix of things for any individual juror to put together, and then you have to have a unanimous decision. So sure, theoretically it could work. It could cause one person to say it's not fair to this person to receive a death penalty.
And I guess we're also going to wait to see if the defendant himself will provide a statement. But before we even get to what the defense will do, the prosecution is still putting on their case. And guess what? Right now, we are live in that courtroom. The first witness of the day for the state is on the stand. So you know what we're doing? We're going live. So as the prosecutor is explaining, Sterling died from malnutrition, dehydration, a diaper rash, an infection, just a total failure to provide life-saving care, which is what he needed. Ashley, this is a very disturbing case, and it's interesting that it's being charged as a murder. This is not simple neglect, as the state says. This is something more. This is murder.
And that's because, Jesse, the result of the neglect was that the child died. It was specifically because of these parents' actions that this child did die and was murdered by the parents. And let me just say this for those who are listening. I know this trial is going to be really difficult, and I know that even hearing the opening statements is horrific, but it is so imperative to, A, get a conviction in this case, and B, really educate about parents who do this to children need to be held accountable, need to be held responsible, because it's un-American unimaginable, absolutely unimaginable anyone would do this to any child.
And you're talking about a 4-month-old baby who was so defenseless, had no opportunity, nothing to protect himself, save himself. This is as innocent and as defenseless as you can possibly get. And this is going to be a tough trial for, I imagine, for Mr. Koehn and his team, but we are going to see what happens when they begin their opening statement, if they do. Stay tuned. We have to take a quick break, and we'll be back live in that courtroom. Okay, welcome back to Law&Crime, everybody. We're still live in the Zachary Koehn case out of Iowa, and in case during the commercial break, the defense presented their opening statement, and what they basically said was, the death of a child is tragic, there's nothing that's going to take this away, but this creates a gut reaction where you immediately go to judgment and you automatically want someone to blame. But it's your job as the jury not to do that, to follow where the evidence will lead you. And ultimately, we want you to return a verdict of not guilty, because this is a tragic death of a child, but it is not a crime. As we wait for the first witness in this case, I want to bring back on Judge Ashley Willcott to talk about that. What did you think of the defense's opening statement?
I actually thought it was really powerful. They didn't go through the evidence, Jesse. They didn't present any list of witnesses or what they expected witnesses to say. Instead, they said what every jury has to keep in mind, regardless of the horrificness of the death, and that is keep an open mind, listen to the evidence, and then he said at the end we're going to come back and explain to you why this was a tragedy and not a murder. So, A, I was surprised they did an opening, but B, I thought it was really effective.
What it sounds to me, though, is with the way that they're doing the murder charge, is not so much that this was a premeditated, intentional killing, but as a result of severe child abuse that resulted in the death of this young boy, that it's almost like a felony murder rule, that someone dies as a result of this felony. And that's the way that they're hooking the first-degree murder. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I see.
No, I agree with you. So the neglect is what caused the death of the child, and consequently can amount, those consequences of their actions leads to the murder in the first degree. I think you're spot on with that.
So how do you defend against neglect when the child was in your custody? How do you defend that? I know we've heard maybe some rumblings of a postpartum depression defense, maybe, but what other kinds of ways could the defense ultimately fight against that? Because that seems like an uphill battle.
Well, I'm assuming, given there are two people that were in the house, that part of his defense is going to be, I wasn't the caretaker, I wasn't aware, it wasn't my responsibility. I don't know that, but that's my guess. But it's really hard to defend against neglect when you have lots of different elements of it. So by that I mean the dirty diaper, the not feeding, leaving in a swing, all the different pieces of neglect really add up.
Yeah, and this is horrifying, a horrifying scene that first responder came to, which you heard about in the opening statement. Listen, they're on a 10-minute break right now, so we're going to switch gears and we're going to go live back to Texas in the Kristopher Love case. A warden is currently on the stand talking about life on death row versus life in prison. What are the differences here? It's important because the jury ultimately has to come back one way or another with either a recommendation for the death penalty or not. And they already found Mr. Love guilty of killing Kendra Hatcher. What will they do in the death penalty phase? Let's go live. All right, everybody, we're learning a little bit about prison life. It's important to know what the fate of Mr. Love will be. I'm back here with Judge Ashley Willcott. What do you think the prosecution's trying to do here by explaining what prison life is, maybe prison life versus someone who's on death row? What are they trying to show?
Exactly. They're trying to show what the person's life, Jesse, is going to be like if they're in prison versus on death row. The benefits, the privileges, the punishments, all of those things, so the jury really can understand the difference. If they don't do this, a juror who doesn't know the criminal justice system is going to sit there and think, well, big deal. They're going to be on death row, which is the same as prison anyway, and it's really not. So they have to show the difference for the jury to make an informed, good decision.
And death row is worse.
Yes, absolutely. Death row is worse and doesn't have the same privileges. Listen, we hear about prisoners all the time getting an education in jail, going to law school, the lunches they have, the dinners they have. I'm not saying it's a cush place. Don't misunderstand me. But the regular prison versus death row are two very different experiences for a person.
And that's what the jury is learning. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be live in love. Okay, so we're listening to the first witness in this case. I'm back here with Judge Ashley Willcott. What I imagine we're going to hear is the different stories that were told by Zachary Koehn, how what we heard in the opening statement was how he initially said, he and his wife, that it was a sudden infant death syndrome, that this child just died out of nowhere, while the prosecution is saying, no, this was building up, and this ultimately led to the infant's death. Is that what you're seeing as well?
I am, but I also think my recollection is in the opening statement, the prosecution said that the first responder thought they were going to revive a baby, not that they were going to find a dead baby. And so I think that that's imperative to find out what he actually told 911 when he called. Because
if any inconsistencies, any kind of doubt in his statement will lead the jury to think that something's amiss.
Right. Agree completely. And that's what the part of the goal is of the prosecution, is to say inconsistent statements, and basically he intended the death of this child, because that's one of the things they've got to prove for murder.
Judge Ashley Willcott, thank you so much for joining us, and we want you back to talk more about this, because unfortunately I know you have a ton of experience in this area.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jesse.
Okay, we'll make sure to have you back on. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will be live. Stay tuned.